rally against rising house prices and rent.
Take a look at this article. It ranks Lisbon as the worst housing market in Europe for rent to income. This is one of the largest problems for the Portuguese economy, a topic quite undocumented, and an EU problem theme that is growing in the Union. My name is Peter, and I'm a finance specialist from Denmark who greatly admire Portugal and have been studying the country since 2020. It is one of my favorite countries in the world, yet sadly Lisbon are in these years experiencing an extreme housing problem, especially for the locals. Using an outsider's perspective, with a comparison of Copenhagen, a city more or less the same size as Lisbon, this documentary might be helpful for Lisbon and Portugal to solve its housing problem. We will be covering why Lisbon are facing problems with skyrocketing rents and housing inequality, while Copenhagen maintains relatively affordable despite having more or less the same demand. To understand, we must dive into Lisbon's history, its policies, and the choices that they've made. Overall, we will look at the problem covering 5 crucial topics. The problem and its effect for Lisbon, the supply side of housing units, the demand side for housing units, the regulation around housing, and the potential solutions. Unlike other aspects tied to wealth like cash, gold, stocks, crypto, etc., housing is one of the core basic needs that any human need to feel safe and enjoy life. Without it, life quality plummets. Having worked with professional real estate in the past, you would be surprised how few politicians really understand the economics effects of housing. It is not their fault, as it is often overlooked when studying political science, yet making the wrong decisions for housing can have disastrous outcomes for citizens. What most cities sadly are doing is that it is very popular to invite in as many people as possible to your country or city before looking at what is physically possible with the existing housing stocks and units being built per year. These things should be in balance, because when things go out of balance as they have in Lisbon, things go really wrong. In brief, we will mainly cover the rental market in Lisbon because it is, as mentioned, the one city in Europe with the highest disparity between income to cost. Also, the rental market almost always covers the middle and lower class and is often the market getting the least amount of attention, yet have the largest effects on the society. Nothing causes people more to vote on new parties than a lack of affordable housing, and with good reason. Looking at home ownership rates in Lisbon, it stands around 69%, with a significant portion of homes being owned by foreign investors or used for short-term rentals, reducing availability for local housing for residents. In Copenhagen, the home ownership rate is around 50%, with many residents opting for rental apartments, including affordable and cooperative housing options. In Lisbon, the impact of soaring rents has meant that people are not only moving outside of the city, but are also often forced to travel more than 1 to 2 hours to reach jobs in the city. Also, 76% of young people live with their parents between the age of 20 to 29, and 30% of the youth have moved abroad to find better paying jobs and lower cost of housing. These two statistics are negatively in the top 3 of European records. This reality makes it fair to debate the output value of the educated workforce in Portugal if it leaves the country. High housing costs also scare away digital nomads and startup people that Lisbon for a decade have been trying to attract with massive programs like the Web Summit. This group of people building companies and creating jobs is a group of people that Portugal want to still be able to attract with low cost of housing.
Lisboetans have to dedicate 50 to 60% of their salary to rent if they have a well-paid job. If you earn the minimum wage, you can forget about renting in Lisbon area.
I spend more than half my income on rent. It's hard to make ends meet even with a good job. Most of my friends have left the city.
I pay around 30% of my income on rent. It's manageable, and I feel secure knowing rent hikes are controlled.
The reality in Lisbon and Portugal have caused the rise of what some call far-right parties like Chega. Others call them a needed solution that deal with the realities of problems instead of ignoring what is causing the problems. A key difference to Denmark and Portugal is the difference in policies rooted in contrasting visions of housing being a human right versus a commodity. In Copenhagen, housing is considered a human right, where stable housing prices means a stable economy with stable population, workforces and families. This stability attracts business investments from abroad and domestically. Looking at this comparison chart, one can see how similar that Lisbon is to Copenhagen. The key differences we will discover seems to be a mixture of the amount of tourists, incomes, and especially regulation around affordable housing. Let's dig deeper into understanding the Lisbon housing market. In Lisbon and Portugal, affordable housing stock is around 2%, which is one of the lowest in the European Union. In the European Union, there's an average of 12% and circa 20% in the Nordics. In Lisbon, average rent in 2023 for a 2-bedroom apartment in the center was around €1,800 a month. In certain prime areas, rents have surged to more than €2,000 a month. The growth since 2015 have been around 80%, driven primarily by foreign investment and the rise of short-term rentals like Airbnb. In Copenhagen, the average rent for a 2-bedroom apartment is around €1,500 a month, yet incomes are 2 to 3 times higher compared to the average incomes in Lisbon. Growth in rents from 2015 have been around 30%, and grown at a significantly slower rate compared to Lisbon, given stricter rent control and housing stock laws. Looking at the housing stock, Lisbon has approximately 325,000 housing units, with around 12 to 15% being used for short-term rentals, such as Airbnb, a very high ratio. The construction of new homes saw that Lisbon gained 2,000 new housing units added annually since 2018. This limited supply has not kept up with the pace of rising demand. In Copenhagen, the total housing units are around 300,000, but the city has been investing heavily into new construction. Vacancy rates are around 2 to 3% due to strict regulation of utilization of units, and in 2023 alone, the city added 5,500 new housing units, particularly in new developing areas. New districts like Nordhavn have added 2,000 new units and will grow to 10,000 units over the next 10 years. Number of hotel beds. Why does it matter to talk about hotel beds? Because hotel beds take up space that locals could have enjoyed for living. Hotels do not have to be placed downtown necessarily. Tourists will still come if they have to travel half an hour to an hour to a destination from an airport. Lisbon has an estimated 65,000 hotel beds, catering to a high number of tourists visiting the city annually. This figure has been growing due to increased tourism demand and foreign investment into the hospitality sector. Copenhagen has approximately 35,000 hotel beds. Though the city is expanding its capacity as tourism continues to grow, the city remains more restrained in terms of hotel development compared to Lisbon. Looking at construction costs, Lisbon benefits from lower cost of building new housing units compared to Copenhagen, at around 1,000 to 1,200 per square meter for mid-range projects. However, bureaucratic delays and complex permit processes often slow down new developments. In Copenhagen, construction costs are higher, averaging around 2,500 to 3,000 euros per square meter for mid-range projects. Denmark's stringent environmental regulation and labor costs contribute to these higher figures, but the city's efficient permit processes allows for more rapid expansion of the housing stock. Looking at the building codes, without getting too much into details, Lisbon has some extremely bureaucratic building and zoning rules that makes it very slow and difficult to build new product. According to the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business report of 2023, Denmark ranks number 6 in the world with around 60 days to obtain building permits, with Portugal ranking number 60 with around 160 days to obtain building permits. Given this reality, modular and prefabricated housing units could be a solution for Lisbon's problem. As an example, cities like Amsterdam have embraced modular and prefabricated housing as a solution to quickly and affordably expand the housing stock. Helsinki has also pioneered similar approaches, allowing for faster and cheaper housing solutions for lower and middle income residents. Looking at vacant property tax or penalties, Lisbon has around 12 to 15% vacancy rates, which means a significant portion of homes are not being utilized. This means around 50,000 housing units. Many are owned by foreign investors or held as short-term rental properties. Even worse is the high percentage of ruins, accounting for around 1% of the housing stock in Lisbon, or around 2,000 to 3,000 housing units that are completely underutilized and not being used. All in all, in Portugal, it is estimated that 50 to 100,000 units are ruins, a very high number for a country with only 10 million people in population. In Copenhagen, only 3 to 4% are vacant, and houses that have not been used comes with fines by the government to landlords. Housing, unlike other assets that make people wealthy, holds an unhidden trade-off that most people overlook. If a person makes a factory that produces goods, or a consultancy that produces services that generate income flows that makes a person wealthy, this will not take out housing units for other people that would otherwise negatively affect them. Yet, when there is no regulation, then housing will only be for the wealthy. Sure, if there is more demand for housing, it is good if prices go up if you own real estate, but only to a certain limit. Of course, if you are a renter, you could care less, but even if you are an owner and prices rise too quickly, you may sell at a profit, but it will come at the risk that you cannot enter in your city again if prices have become unaffordable. Lisbon saw foreign investment in 2023 of 11% of all transactions coming from foreign investments. Portugal's Golden Visa program, granted residency to property investors, played a major role in driving this trend. Since 2012, foreign investors have invested 6 billion into Lisbon's real estate. Price growth due to foreign buyers are estimated to have pushed property prices up 15 to 20% in Lisbon over the last 5 years, yet have also contributed to the renovation of the city. In Copenhagen, foreign purchasing and contracts have been much more limited. Non-resident foreign investors account for 2 to 3% of the total property transaction due to stricter rules requiring residency or work ties to Denmark for property purchases. However, in recent years, 50% of all transaction volumes have been to foreign investors that have bought rental properties in the free market for companies. In Lisbon, in 2023, saw 10% of its population consisting of foreign residents. Many of these are high-earning expats or digital nomads from countries with higher income levels, further driving demand for housing. Nomad visas was introduced as a digital visa that attracted many high-income remote workers, adding to the pressure of this housing market. In Copenhagen, foreign residents make up around 8% of the population, but the government has not actively promoted programs like a digital nomad visa, so the impact on the housing market is less pronounced. Of course, when you are a finance person, as myself in general, you are against regulation and bureaucracy. But when it comes to housing, we as a society benefit from stable and regulated housing as much as we benefit from having regulated public stock markets and financial markets. Completely free markets often end in unstable markets for everyone. Rent control in Portugal were largely dismantled in 2012, allowing landlords to raise rents to market levels. On one side, this was good because landlords needed to be able to raise rents to renovate properties with rising inflation costs. Yet on the other side, it came with trade-offs of fast rising rental cost. Only recently has the government attempted to reinstate some regulation, but the impact is still minimal. If you look at tax on foreign buyers, Portugal's tax system is more favorable towards foreign property investors, with capital gains tax and property tax rates lower than those in Denmark. For example, capital gains tax in Portugal for non-residents is 28%, whereas in Denmark it's up to 42% as an individual, or 22% tax for a company before paying the 42% if you want to take out the funds from the company. Looking at rent control in Denmark, there is a well-established system that applies to 75% of all rental properties in Copenhagen. These regulations restrict annual rent increases and ensure that these rents cannot rise sharply even if the demand for housing grows, excluded for cost of inflation, of course. Tax on foreign buyers. Denmark imposes stricter taxes and regulation on foreign property buyers, making it less attractive for speculative investments. Non-residents are generally barred from purchasing second home unless they meet specific conditions. Only 1% of the housing stock is allowed to be owned without living there. In Vienna, over 60% of residents live in social housing or rent-controlled apartments, with affordability pegged to household incomes. Policies limited rent-to-income ratios could have been considered in Lisbon as a way to benchmark rental price ceiling levels against average wages. Zoning policies. There's no widespread zoning laws that mandate a percentage of affordable housing in new developments in Lisbon. If you look at cities like New York, Copenhagen, and San Francisco, they all require new residential developments to allocate a certain percentage of units, typically 20 to 30%, for affordable housing. This ensures that new developments contribute directly to affordability and avoid segmentation. Also, looking at land value taxation, property taxation in Lisbon primarily targets built properties, but there's no significant tax on undeveloped land or speculation. In cities like Copenhagen, Hong Kong, and Taipei, land value tax discourages holding undeveloped land for speculative purposes. Taxing the value of the land rather than just the buildings on it encourages landowners to develop properties, increasing housing supply. In Lisbon, the city's large number of short-term rentals, especially through platforms like Airbnb, has significantly reduced the affordability of long-term rentals, pushing rental prices higher for local residents. In Copenhagen, short-term rental platforms are more regulated, with laws limiting the number of days a property can be rented on the platforms like Airbnb, typically 70 to 90 days a year. This regulation has mitigated the impact on the long-term rental market. For both Lisbon, Copenhagen, and other cities, it is fascinating to remember that no economist 50 years ago could have imagined airline tickets to cost around 100 euros to fly around Europe, nor the volume of millions of people flying from city to city, especially at a time when flying would cost thousands of euros. This is a topic we're working on another documentary to cover. We call it The Peaceful Invasion of Cities by Air: How Cheap Airline Tickets Destroy Cities. We especially focus on the forecast of the billions of people flying to the West from China and India. The Denmark and Copenhagen comparison. One of the most interesting things studying the Lisbon housing market have been to learn about the reality of the importance that housing regulations have not only had for Copenhagen, but also as for Denmark in total. As a country half the size of Portugal, Denmark faced its first massive immigration challenge post-World War II, with tens of millions of Europeans affected by the horrors of the World War that wanted to enter and settle in Denmark, given that Denmark was fairly unscripted during the war. The government could not handle that inflow of people and was thus forced to regulate and make rules that are still more or less in use today. Rules such as 1% of the housing stock is only allowed for foreigners to buy, or that you have to live in the nation for minimum 5 years to attain citizenship, are still old legacy rules of World War II. Hard, some might say, but when you look at the geography of the nation of Denmark, it makes sense, especially today. Within 2 hours of flight at a cost less than 100 euro, technically 180 million people could reach Copenhagen. There is simply not enough space for such a technically large population in a small country and city. It's always very unpopular to have restrictive immigration policy, but the Danish balanced approach have so far been keen to ensure that all citizens can have high life quality versus bad life quality for many. The road ahead, what should Lisbon do? Lisbon faces tough choices. Will it continue to cater to foreign investors and tourists, or will it adopt policies that prioritizes its citizens? Before this analysis, I used to believe that the stability of the Danish economy came from oil found in the 70s, massive pension reforms in the 60s, and large companies like Lego, Novo Nordisk, Carlsberg, etc. However, I have come to realize that income without regulation of affordable housing is an extremely important factor to secure high life quality for all citizens, plus the benefit that this regulation creates a more stable housing market overall. Copenhagen shows that it is possible to maintain a balanced, vibrant economy that benefits from foreign investment while still ensure housing for all. Having studied this problem for the last 5 years, it seems clear that the following is needed to make Lisbon a good place for locals and foreigners again. First and foremost, the good thing is that this problem is nothing new. Throughout history, hundreds of large cities have faced this problem and come out the other side stronger. The same can happen for Lisbon and Portugal if politicians consider doing the following. 1. Build more housing stock, a lot more. Ease the bureaucracy and rules so the city can expand faster, yet do it with caution. Be careful not to overbuild, since prices could also fall too fast. 2. Regulate Airbnb and hotels and give locals a preference for housing. 3. Invest more in infrastructure as bridges, tunnels and trains so more people can fastly get in and out of the city. 4. Add a land value tax for ruins and vacant housing so they are activated for housing, especially ruins seems like an opportunity for growth. 5. Implement similar inclusionary zoning laws mandated for developers of new housing building, including a minimum 20% of units that have to be for affordable or social housing tied to the median income of Portuguese citizens. 6. Portugal needs immigration, yes, but regulate the volume of immigration with the capacity of housing stock to create stability.